My name is 𝐸💚𒁻 and I am the founder of Kids Innovate Africa, and I've had the privilege of working with learners on the spectrum. And how this came about, it was 2022, I believe, where we had a young man, a young boy rather, and his name is Owen. So he walked into our robotics class in Cape Town, and he had a hearing aid of some sort in his ears. And so how he was there, or how it happened for him to be there, his mom went to drop the big brother for robotics. So she wanted to drop the older brother and walk out with the little brother, go to the shop or somewhere. But I got very curious, when I see young children or young people and there's robots nearby, I'm naturally very curious to engage with them and ask them how old they are, what grade do they do, and what they like to do for fun. So I asked him, "So what's your name?" I went down to his level and he said, "My name is Owen." I said, "Would you like to try robotics?" Because we had a class at that time. And he said, he looked at me, he looked at Mom, and I said, "Come on, Mom." Her name is Tasman. Yeah. And Mommy said, no, it's fine. And I was like, "Are you sure, Owen?" Owen said, "Yeah." And I said, "Mommy, you have to let him. It's just 2 hours. It's time for you. You can go to the beach, or you can go to the mall, or go have coffee." And I could see she was very uneasy. But eventually she agreed, and she said, "Look, if anything happened, just call me. I'm not going to go anywhere. I'll have a drink at the health shop." And so we worked with Owen. He amazed me during those 2 hours. He was very attentive. I remember him following building instructions. He built Milo rover, the space robot, the NASA space robot. He built it, he programmed it, and just before he could program it, because they were supposed to take a break for 15 minutes, and he said, "You said we're going to take a break at this time. It's this time already." So he had a wristwatch. "Is this time already? Is it time for break now? Should we go?" I think it was about 9. And they went on a break and they came back. Long story short, when Mommy came, she stood by the door. I didn't notice her. And she was tearing up. She couldn't believe that was her Noah. I mean, not Noah, Owen. That was her Owen. And I said, "Are you okay?" She said, "I've never seen my child like this, so focused, so invested in something. I expected that he would be throwing tantrums or crying or getting frustrated because he's had brain injury. So for him, you would say it's a form, brain injury can alter your brain, the structure of your brain." So Mommy was very pleased, very surprised, and she decided to enroll him for robotics. He was with us for about 6 months to a year, if I remember correctly, and Mommy used to travel really far. I think beyond Durbanville, somewhere around that area, to come to bring Owen and the brother to robotics every week. And he was always looking forward to robotics. He was always so happy. So what I found out from Mom is that Owen gets anxious when he's in an unfamiliar environment or he's with people he doesn't quite know. He would get frustrated because sometimes he can't quite hear really well, which is why he has a hearing aid. He'll throw, not necessarily throwing tantrums, but he'll be so frustrated or confused, maybe because he can't hear people or people can't understand him. But from then on, he touched my heart. The story didn't end there. We went and met new learners or children that were on the spectrum. We did home workshops where we met quite a few of these learners that are on the spectrum. So from then on, I decided with my colleague at that time, Natasha, an amazing young woman. She was a UWC graduate in business information, right? Yeah. something like that in tech, essentially. And we said, you know what? We were intrigued by these kids, the way they learn, how they could be so hyper, and the moment you give them a robot and you give them a computer or a laptop, they're focused. You give them a challenge, they solve it quickly. So continuously, this particular boy, I don't remember his name, he continuously built his robots faster, coded and tested, and added the complexity to his prototypes. And I was like fascinated. And then I decided I'm going to run a project and call it Robotics with Neurodiverse. So we tested this with a few other students. Eventually, we commissioned an academic study thanks to the SAP Foundation because they saw the need for something like this and they sponsored us. So the objective of their sponsorship was to help us scale, help us reach more learners on the spectrum. So Robotics with Neurodiverse, in essence, this program has quite a few objectives, but I'm going to tell you about the very basic ones. Is we're introducing learners on the spectrum to careers in STEM, more like Richard Branson, right? He's dyslexic, nobody talks about that, right? He has changed space travel to some extent. He's got businesses that are really successful. And Elon Musk, he is also on the spectrum, but nobody talks about that. Everybody talks about how an amazing businessman he is. We know he has changed the face of, the cost of space travel, space exploration. Because of his innovation, NASA can make multiple trips to space because of the reusable rocket. So essentially, we want to destigmatize autism or neurodiversity because by exposing these young people to careers in STEM through robotics, animation, and game development, which is the services that Kids Innovate Africa offers, we give them opportunity to add value to their community. But also, one of the basic objectives of this program, which is, it warms my heart every time I see a kid coming through our door with the shoulders hunched and not maintaining eye contact, as we know, this is some of the indicators. And seeing them after a few months or a few weeks sometimes with the shoulders back, so confident, they can engage in a conversation. They feel really positive about their unique way of being. So expose learners to STEM careers, help them or nurture their development of the interpersonal skills, things like confidence, self-belief, communication skills, amongst many other soft skills. But in the long term, we want to contribute to the adjustment of the national education policy as far as how these young people are being educated or assessed within the national education system. Yeah, so that's what this is about, robotics with neurodiverse. And I mean, you would know, Bennitha, that we've been running celebrating neurodiversity every quarter, which is something you can share about when you introduce yourself.
Wow, it's such an inspiring story that you have just told, because it's amazing to see how robotics can actually help young kids like this, especially in their daily lives. And especially when you're talking about Owen and how he walked in so hyper, and how after you've introduced him to robotics and how he's engaged in robotics, at the end of the day, he kind of saw the light in the tunnel, and he was basically focused. And it's amazing to see how robotics can actually change, and it can help a few of these kids out there, especially the neurodiverse learners. But yeah, so to cut to the chase, my name's Kirsten, and I am a robotics facilitator at Kids Innovate Africa. And what I do is I basically teach robotics to young kids. So I do the elementary phase. And it warms my heart because I love working with neurodiversity learners. And it brings me joy every day when I know that I'm going to be teaching these learners robotics. And yes, that's me.
So my name is Bennitha. I am one of the facilitators that work with Kirsten in teaching these kids and getting to know them and seeing how, um, yes, they might have these limitations, some would say, where they can't really sit still for long periods of time, or they can't really um, understand the way a neurotypical would understand. But the more you interact with these kids, you'll notice that they have so many strengths that are not emphasized. And a lot of those strengths, you'll find that the more you emphasize that and the more you let them know that they are good at this, it really helps build their self-esteem. And that basically is something that is a core, something that's very core to what we're trying to deliver. It's not just delivering a service. It's a lot about empowering these kids and helping these kids understand that yes, you might have autism, you might have ADHD, but you're so much more than that. You're a kid that can build a robot. You're a kid that can stay focused in many instances where kids are not able to um sit with a book for 5 hours, but because they're doing something interactive like robotics, it gives them the opportunity to sit and learn a skill and spend time with themselves and understand more about themselves. So yeah, I work with Kirsten and my name is Benita.
You don't work with me?
uh right, I also work with Kajima.
Okay, so yeah, so what are the most common labels that parents hear first when it comes to the neurotypes?
I think one of the most common labels is autism and ADHD. You tend to find when a lot of parents find out that their um, children are neurodiverse and they've gone through all the tests and all of that, despite that and having the facts and the documents saying what the child has, I think it's generalized. So a lot of the community, if these neurodiverse learners act a specific way, or for example, a child who has ADHD and they're hyperactive in class, your automatic reaction is, oh, that child is naughty. Meanwhile, it's not actually like that. There's different sides to it. So I think definitely one of the main labels is ADHD and autism, and it's
Mm,
very generalized
mm,
everywhere.
mm.
And it's one of the most common that you hear all over.
So ADHD, autism, and I can imagine most people don't even know what these things are. You know, when your child is being diagnosed from the doctor's office, or the psychologist or the psychiatrist's office, you're like, what is this, right? So autism, ADHD, what else, Benny?
I think with when it comes to diagnosing as well, like a lot of the times, I feel that parents already have this idea of what autism is, and a lot of it is more on the negative side rather than the positive. So the moment a parent hears their child has autism or ADHD, a lot of the time the parents get discouraged, or they feel like, oh no, there's something wrong with my child, something needs to be fixed. So these common labels, they don't really have positive connotations related to them, where a parent can say, wow, okay, my child has ADHD. He has these strengths that many kids don't have. A lot of the time they have, oh no, my child is not going to be able to sit through an exam for an hour or so. So I think
Okay.
that's a lot of things.
Uh-huh. But I mean, I hear you talking about labels, but are labels harmful? Would you say they're harmful?
I think to a certain degree, if you're not properly informed
Mm-hmm.
about the labels, I think um, that that lack of information kind of makes it harmful, because you don't really know what you're working with, and you only know what you're working with based on what other people have said,
Mm.
or based on facts on the internet.
Yeah.
So before even meeting with a psychologist or an expert, um, it could be harmful because the parents already start thinking of the negatives first.
Ah,
And that I feel is very harmful. What about
okay.
you, Kristen?
So I agree with Benny.
Mm.
I definitely do think that it can be harmful to a certain extent, but there is a part of me that also disagrees, because if you sit and think about it, actually, if you find out that your child has got ADHD or autism, or you, in fact, yourself, if you find out that you were diagnosed with ADHD or autism, it's not really harmful, the label, because if you think about it, if you have ADHD, you would embrace that you have ADHD. Yes, your brain may be different, you may be thinking different to what neurotypical people think, but at the end of the day, a label is a label. If I've got ADHD or autism, I would embrace it, because I will show the world and people out there that I'm exactly the same as you. Yes, I am neurodiverse and you are neurotypical, but at the end of the day, we are the same people.
It's
Yes,
not
how.
that easy. It's not, sorry to cut you, Kirsten, but I'm just thinking that when you say, yes, I would accept it, you would likely accept it because you have got a lot of experience now. You've worked with learners on the spectrum, but not only that, you've engaged with the parents that are raising these children. You have had to attend quite a lot of workshops with the experts themselves. So you are a little bit more knowledgeable, right? And you're more empowered. So if you were to hear that you have autism, you would like, oh, okay, at least now I know. And then you remember all the facts that the experts have told you. You would remember how the kids you've worked with behave. You would also remember what the parents have told you. But if it's just me, I don't know anything about this neurodiversity or autism, and I'm hearing for the first time you have autism. No, I'm not going to say, ooh, I'm different. I'm going to be good and I'm going to be great and I'm awesome. I'm probably going to get depressed, which is what we have been reading. That often people, maybe not the kids, but the adults, often when people find out, and maybe not even just finding out, once they found out and other people know, people treat them differently. And I can imagine if I'm a student at school and I'm being told, oh, you're autistic, and obviously we'll get to that point later on, but all this negative feedback I'm getting from people around me, could be my aunt, my uncle, my relatives, or even my parents who are not really knowledgeable about the neurotypes, for example, that I can eventually be depressed because what's wrong with me?
But I also think, like with regards to what Kirsten is saying, I think it differs in terms of I don't know if this is the right word, but like in terms of the age. I think for more like teenagers going on to adults, I feel like if I were to find out that I have autism, I think I would look back on my experiences and what I've been through as a child, as part of my childhood now, and I think I would be more relieved knowing that, okay, there's nothing wrong with me. There's just this like there's a neurological reason as to why I'm wired this way.
A scientific reason.
There's a scientific reason as to why I'm wired this way. So I feel like there would be a sense of relief for like more teenage, like when you're at that age as a teenager, as an adult, I feel like there would be a sense of relief where you'd be like, okay, I now know that I have this, and now it's up to myself to kind of educate myself and find ways to kind of integrate myself into society, because at the end of the day, majority of society is neurotypical. So unfortunately at this stage I would have to figure out how to integrate myself. But because I know that there is this thing called autism or ADHD, I'd be at a better position um to not be to not end up depressed, if that makes sense. But I do understand for like kids and parents who are still raising these kids, it's it's still in a way harmful, because these kids depend on their parents and the decisions that their parents make. So I feel like there's a lot of pressure for parents because they have to raise these kids to live in society. So I feel like it's more of a pressure, and that kind of makes the label negative, because at the end of the day, these parents have to let go of their kids when they become adults.
So essentially, you are saying, if I'm hearing you correctly, that the community is also important, where these kids are growing up.
There's a lot of factors that
Mm.
come into play to kind of decide whether it's harmful or not.
I hear you. Yeah, I would say yes. I think, Kirsten, you were saying this earlier that it's both harmful. It could both be harmful and maybe not harmful. But I would think it's important to have the labels, because if you don't have the labels, then they wouldn't necessarily get the recognition or the support that they need. If you're thinking in terms of the law, the constitution in South Africa, if you are a student if you're a learner in school in South Africa, the law makes a provision that maybe if you're dyslexic, for example, you should get a scribe, right? If you have a special type or a different neurotype, that's not necessarily neurotypical, you can you can request that provisions be made for you. That's why schools like 𝐻Meet, for example, some students write exams in the computer lab. They've got a scribe. I don't know if some of them use listening devices, something that reads the questions to them and they answer, or something that kind of read the questions to them and write the answers. The student will say the answers and somebody will write them. So without those labels, you cannot get that recognition. That's why assessments or diagnoses are very important, because once you have the diagnosis, there have to be some provisions that are being made available to you.
So, Coach, what are the misconceptions most parents or teachers carry when they hear these terms?
So the misconception is, if somebody has, for example, a dyscalculia, right, which is a person's inability to understand numbers or math, right, people automatically assume that person is dumb, which is not actually true. So it's very important for people to understand that human intelligence is something that's deep, that's complex. You cannot just describe it just using one factor. The misconceptions with autism and ADHD, people might say that that person is naughty, that child is naughty, or they never sit still, or they are so emotionally disconnected, which is way far from the truth, because we know, we work with these children, that they are some of the most empathetic people you can find. You'd find a kid in a robotics class, for example, who's struggling to troubleshoot the code, and one who's on the spectrum or who has ADHD comforting them, and saying, I can help you. And really, the level of empathy is quite deep. So it's really narrow for people to believe in these misconceptions, which I understand is largely because they don't have knowledge. Yeah. I mean, I can go further and talk about dyspraxia, right? Which is a person's inability, which is all about the coordination of the muscles in the brain and the neurons. So as you mentioned, Kirsten, earlier, that people might say, oh, this person is so clumsy because they're shaking, or which is not true. The person is not clumsy. It's just how their brain is wired. So those are some of the many misconceptions that people have about the neurotypes or neurodiversity.
Yes, thank you for that. It's definitely true. And I think another misconception is kids who have sensory issues. A lot of people tend to think, oh, the kids are being dramatic when they overreact to sounds or lights or things like that. When meanwhile, it is a sensory issue that the child is facing. It is something that the child is struggling with. But people who are not educated on things like this just assume that, oh, my child's being dramatic. Why is this child acting like that? Which is not really fair on society, is it? No. So, Benny, I would like to know, how did hearing a label about someone you know make you feel? Have you ever encountered someone who has autism, ADHD? When they told you, how did that make you feel as a person?
So when I first started working, I was able to work with someone who was diagnosed with autism. And when I first heard that they were diagnosed with autism, at that time I would say that I wasn't educated enough. I had a general understanding of what autism was, and Looking back, I don't think it was a good generalization. I just thought, okay, um, maybe they don't really feel emotions. I thought they would be very in and like wouldn't be like the emotional intelligence was very low and I wouldn't be able to relate with them on a deep level. But once I started to get to know that person, I would say that they're one of the most emotionally intelligent people I've ever met. Like in instances where I felt down, a lot of the time they would uplift me and make me feel better about the day, which I didn't know it was possible for people with autism. And as I started to learn more about autism and educate myself about autism, I found out that there are so many good qualities within autistic people that are not really emphasized or put out there for people to know. Like if I knew at that point that I would be working with an autism person and I was more educated, I would be more excited and I would be more interested to learn about that person. And I because of that experience, the next time I worked with someone who had ADHD, I was more intrigued, I was more curious, I was more open to understanding that person and kind of um, trying to support them as best as I can and trying to ensure that they don't feel that they had to
Mask, maybe.
mask themselves or they had to put in extra effort. I wanted to make sure that it was a very natural exchange between us. So, and that came with educating yourself and making yourself aware of the different strengths and the different things that really um, help support them and help make them feel welcome into a space where a lot of the time they are the only ones who are there.
It's very nice, a beautiful experience, Penny. It's so nice that it's a first-hand experience, and I can imagine there's probably somebody out there who wish they would have the same colleague as you. You know, so compassionate. Yeah, just imagine. Yeah. So, what does neurodiversity really mean, Kirsten? I mean, a lot of people have had it. It's a buzzword. In fact, I heard from the last robotics event we had, where somebody told me my daughter is on the spectrum, but you know, she just feel it's so annoying that it's such a buzzword. It is like an in word now, and I don't know if everybody want to be on the spectrum, want to be in neurodivergent. What does this word mean?
So, in simple terms, neurodiversity means that people's brains work in different ways. So, it's very important for people to realize that these differences are natural. They're not wrong or broken, they come naturally to a person who is neurodiverse. Benny, do you have an opinion on what neurodiversity is, or do you agree, or do you have something else to say?
I think the way I look at it is when it comes to defining what neurodiversity actually is, um, I always imagine kind of like people's brains. And what I imagine is that, yes, our brains um, look the same, but they have different functions, right? So, as I growing up, I was the only person in my family who was left-handed, and I always used to wonder, okay, why am I the only person who's left-handed? And I did some research, and you'll find that there's a lot less people who are left-handed in the world compared to right people. And when it comes to the science behind it, you'll find that a lot of people who are left-handed are more creative. They use the more creative side of their brain. So growing up, I was more interested in drawing and things like that. So when it comes to neurodiversity, yes, our brains are the same, but we use different parts of our brains, and a lot of the different parts of our brains are more highlighted, right? So you'll find that someone with autism, they are emotionally intelligent and they use the part of their brain that focuses on emotional intelligence. They feed off your emotions. They are able to tell, okay, this person is very angry with me, and they might not know how to react to it, but they can feel those emotions more strongly than a person who, like a neurotypical, who will not be able to really sense that kind of energy from a different person. So that's basically how I define it. And yeah, I don't know, maybe you have something different.
Yeah, no, it's not really different from you guys. I mean, just to say, I think Kirsten has covered it as well. That it's a different type of being. Just like, you are peach or white, you're brown or black, and I'm also brown or black, right? In the same way, your eyes look different from Kirsten. Your nose also. It's a difference, right? It doesn't mean your eye, there's something wrong with your eyes. They're just different, right? So it's the same with the brain. It's different. The brains are wired differently. And that's something, in my view, that should be celebrated. Just like we celebrate, a diversity in culture or race or languages. We should celebrate the diversity of the mind. And I think Bennitha has done a really good job of talking about the strength that exists within this neurodiversity. So it's something that really has to be embraced. And I would like to think that countries that are not fully capitalizing on the power of neurodiversity are likely to be left behind. Bennitha talked about the creativity that's involved, and you could also define that creativity as some innovation. And countries that are really doing well in the innovation space are those that have got laws that protects and that are very inclusive, and they include people that are neurodivergent.
Yes. So you mentioned earlier on that neurodivergent brains are wired differently. So I would like to know if you could maybe go a bit more in depth or explain that more. How is neurodivergent brains wired differently? What exactly is it? Is there maybe emotional, is there executive function, sensory processing, something like that?
Okay, I can start on this one. In fact, my answer would likely be based on our most recent Celebrating Neurodiversity, where we had a clinical psychologist, 𝐬𝒎𝒎𝒂, and we also had Kristen Barnett. Okay, Kristen Bartlett. We had so I'm really referencing from the recent Celebrating Neurodiversity event, which ran this month, right, or in June, where we had the two experts. And how Kristen explained it was really nice, because he unpacked it for the parents to say, the executive function is slightly different. The part of the brain that makes kind of big decisions or decide on tasks, that has critical thinking. Theirs is why it's slightly different from ours. And their level of sensory sensitivity, it's really heightened. That's why you would see sometime a certain type of clothing material could be really irritating on somebody who's neurodivergent, and you'd see they really can't tolerate it. Now they have to take it off, and it has to come off their body. And if they could hear what you may, as a neurotypical, think, oh, that's very silent. You can hear the sound of the fridge, right? For them, that sound might come across as really, really loud, that as a parent, you may have to switch off the fridge because it's too loud, right? So their sensory sensitivities are really heightened. So, but that's just how the brain is wired. And obviously there's behavioral as well, where as an autistic person, I mean, I'm going to reference one of our lovely, most loved ex-colleague who is on the spectrum. There would be days where she'd come in the office and you'd be right there and she'll pass you and she's just happy and she won't greet you, right? People who don't understand might say, oh, how rude. You come in, you find me here in the morning and you don't say hello. But because we are educated about neurodiversity, thanks to the many experts that we've come across who educated us, we're able to understand that her behavior, it might not be accepted in the neurotypical world, but that's just how she is. And there's nothing wrong with that.
No, I think definitely what you guys are saying makes sense. And a lot of the time when we're looking at strengths of these neurodiverse kids, they are really good at thinking outside of the box. Especially when we're teaching them robotics, a lot of the times, um, you would find that the code that you've put in is not going the way you expect, but they are able to think out of the box and come up with different solutions that are very innovative. They have hyper empathy, so they're very empathetic. Especially, you'll find that a lot of the times it's the students that um it's a lot of the times that the students that are supporting other students are the neurodiverse students, right? Because they can, I feel like they can really relate to the emotions that some of the students feel. When a student is breaking themselves down, you'd find that a learner who's autistic or has ADHD will be there to let them know that you can do this. You are smart, for example. So things like that. And I also think that in terms of the emotional IQ, like they understand things on a deeper level. And I also think that because of all the experiences they've gone through with treatment at school, engaging with their parents, I feel like the emotional depth is so much deeper because they feel so many emotions, whether it's rejection, whether it's love, whether it's hope. They really understand that on a molecular level, and they can kind of bring that out when somebody else needs to hear that from someone. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think those are some of the biggest strengths that
Yeah.
neurodiverse kids have.
When they show up, I just want to share this on the behavioral aspect of being wired differently. What comes to my mind is actually one of our also ex-colleague who has ADHD, right? And I found it behaviorally to be quite interesting that sometimes people on who are neurodivergent, they forget quite easily, right? So you would agree on something, and a few minutes later, the person forgot. So it requires a lot of empathy to be able um, to accommodate, not maybe to accommodate. I don't know how to put it. It requires a lot of empathy when you work with neurodivergent colleagues, or when you work with neurodivergent learners, that you may have said, "Oh, Bennitha, I told you to put your book on the table." And Bennitha didn't put the book on the table straight away because maybe she was finishing her puzzle or something. And then 2 minutes later, Bennitha hasn't put her book on the table. And you go, "Bennitha, I don't see your book here. I'm about to leave." "Oh, I forgot," right? And
I was gonna say that her name is
did
Bennitha.
I just say
You
Bennitha?
Bennitha.
I'm trying to make up a name that's not you, and the name didn't come. I wanted to say Danielle. So, okay, so essentially, I'm just saying that um, there is a level of sometimes people on the spectrum forget in terms of behaviorally.
Yes, and definitely, I just would like to add on to what Benny said. One of the strengths that neurodivergent learners have, or students, is they tend to be very honest. So they say what they mean. They have no hidden agendas, which, sometimes it can be a good thing, and sometimes it can be a bad. Some people may feel offended, but, at the end of the day, I think it's more on your part to kind of do research to understand how some neurodivergent learners are. And yeah, so that's just one of
It's
the
a
strengths.
beautiful thing. I think humanity can do with a lot of with a lot of honesty. Sometimes you ask person, "How are you?" and they'll say, "I'm fine." But neurodivergent, you'll say, "How are you?" and they'll say, "I'm upset." You would be asking, "How are you?" as a form of greeting in the morning, and they'll be saying, I'm upset. I'm not fine." So a bit of honesty is really good. That's something I really value about neurodivergent people. ability to say what they mean, as you said, and mean what they say.
Why are schools often mismatched with these brains, these neurodivergent students? Why do you think public schools, particularly, are mismatched with these conditions?
Um, this is just my opinion. But I think that one, the schools do not have the capacity to train the staff. I think especially with the South African schooling system, a lot of the schools firstly are overcrowded. Um, a lot of the times the curriculum is too packed and there's not a lot of opportunities for these teachers to educate themselves because they're already emotionally drained by dealing with a massive class with neurotypical individuals that already um having to find the time or spend more time trying to educate themselves, I feel like is a lot of pressure. Not that I'm saying it's a bad thing. I do think that these teachers have to educate themselves because at the end of the day, we live in a very diverse community. And it's important that these teachers are equipped with the right tools to work and engage with these neurodiverse kids because at the end of the day, it will make their jobs easier and essentially improve the school experience of the neurodivergent child. So I think that's something that needs to be emphasized, that um, we really want these teachers to be in a better position to engage and teach these kids. But at the same time, I am still looking at the side where um, the educational system right now has not made it available for them to have an opportunity to learn or educate themselves because of how packed the curriculum is, because of how overcrowded these schools are. So yeah, that's my opinion.
Yeah. And yeah, I agree with Benny. Our teachers, we love them so much because teachers work really hard. Considering the amount of content they need to cover, every single term, it's a lot. Having that much content to cover and still being able to nurture the students to do well in school, it's something we must commend. However, as Bennitha is saying, they don't have resources. They don't have resources. And she was talking about having overcrowded classrooms. If I'm a teacher and I've got 30 learners in my class and I have to go through the curriculum because either my bonus is linked to whether I've covered the curriculum or the curriculum that I'm supposed to cover within a specified period or not, I'm likely going to run through this curriculum like there's no tomorrow, right? And so what that means is it disadvantages a child who has slightly different learning needs. I'm not able to meet those needs because I'm just focused on what I need to get done. So you're absolutely right. Being under-resourced, our schools being under-resourced, our public schools, we know most of them are under-resourced. So that's one of the, unfortunately, factors that makes that contribute to the mismatch of what the schools are able to offer and what these learners really need. But I think we must commend our teachers for the hard work they do. And what I'm excited about, Kirsten, when she came during the last neurodiversity event, she talked about how she's engaging with some universities in South Africa to make autism education or neurodiversity education part of the curriculum. So if you want to become a teacher, you go study a particular university degree for teaching, you would be expected either to do a module in neurodiversity or something like that, which would really be very important. But that alone is not enough because, if you're still under-resourced, you would literally just focus on the neurotypicals and sadly miss to focus your attention on the neurodivergent learners.
Yes, and I definitely think what you both said is true, and I think it ties in with parents' emotions as well. Because if you think about it, in today's society, there's a huge gap in the market for neurodiversity. Not a lot of people are educated on neurodiversity. There's a lot of people out there who don't even know what neurodiversity means, or they've got children who perhaps have ADHD or autism, but with the uneducated parents, they don't understand. They may be struggling with dealing with their children or understanding what's going on. Um, so I think this can definitely, it can also leave parents feeling stressed, because if you think about it, public schools, they don't really have the resources to accommodate for these kids.
Mm.
And because there's such a huge gap in the market of neurodiversity, there's not a lot of neurodiverse school that accommodates kids on the spectrum. So it's difficult for parents, because now you're stressing about, is my child going to get an education? Will I be able to get my child in a school? And I think this also, it leads to them feeling stressed also about their child's future when it comes to university. Because if their child, once they complete high school, it's kind of, as a parent, you're sitting there thinking, what is there more for my child?
Mhm.
Because neurodiversity is not well known out there. And currently, the jobs out there, you find there is a lot of neurotypical people doing the jobs and all of that. But what are the accommodations that companies have made for neurodiverse people? And it's not a lot. You don't really hear companies that talk about accommodating the neurodiverse needs and all of that. So I think parents, it's a huge burden on the parents. They feel overwhelmed, they're stressed about their child's future. Is society going to change? Are they eventually going to accommodate these neurodiverse learners in the working field? And I think it's also one of the major um, emotions or factors that parents feel is denial and acceptance. A lot of the parents struggle to accept that their child has ADHD or autism, because if you think about it as a mom, if you found out that your child has ADHD, or your son or your daughter has it, it's kind of not that your dream life for your boy has gone away, but now it's kind of, you need to figure out more ways to kind of support your child. It's not necessarily going to be an easy road. It will be a rough road that you'll have to go through with your son or your daughter. But yes, I think it's definitely a strain.
Yeah, I mean, it can be a strain, depending on the amount of support you have. If I'm thinking of some of our students, they go to private school. As you said, public schools are under-resourced, so the only options that parents are left with to have their child properly catered for, they go to private schools like 𝐾𝐨𝐿 House in Cape Town, Chilanti, and I know there's a few others in Gauteng and a few others in other provinces. However, they don't come cheap. So there is obviously to get that level of support, because I know in some schools there's in 𝐾𝐶 House, I know they've got therapists, speech therapies, behavioral therapies. They've got a few interventions that are offered at the school, but they come at a price. So, as a parent, you have to deny yourself a lot of things to ensure that your child's education would be secure. So it's quite easy to get depressed and to get stressed out. But I think events like ours, celebrating neurodiversity, which runs every term, one parent mentioned that events like ours are important in the community because they bring hope. They connect the parents together. And they educate as well to say it's not all gray. Look at the positive sides as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you guys. Especially when you started speaking about like the denial that parents go through. I feel like that's a very kind of very critical stage where parents, I feel like they go into the sense of I don't know what's that saying,
It's a grieving.
kind of like they don't, they like, it's like they didn't want it to be this way, because when you like expecting and you really want to, when you are bringing this child into the world, like you never expect it to go this way, so that denial kind of comes in, where you're like, no, this this isn't like, this, my child isn't supposed to go through this.
It's
And
denial.
you obviously, as a parent, you want to protect your child from any form of pain or suffering.
Mm.
And unfortunately, these kids do go through pain and suffering on different levels, and as a parent you want to protect that from them. So denial is definitely is a stage that parents go through, and I feel like guilt is strongly attached to that, because now parents are starting to think, is it my fault?
What did I do?
Is it genetics? Did I do something to my kids' genetics? So guilt comes into play when our parents feel guilty, and they start I feel like they start detaching themselves from their kids as well, because um, they don't, like, that guilt really makes it difficult to connect with your child, because you kind of feel like this happened because of you, which is really not the case, to be
Yeah,
honest.
I also want to add to that, as a mom, what I found from experience, obviously as a mom, I cannot detach from my child. It doesn't matter what condition or what situation they're in. You're inherently, um, as to say, a protector. Inherently, you're a nurturer. And even though the world might see your child as different, you naturally will love as moms. So yes, yes, you say there might be feelings of guilt and questioning. Is it something that I've done that got my child to be like that? And largely that's because of lack of education. And the parents that we have seen in our community in terms of celebrating neurodiversity and robotics with neurodiverse, they are some of the fiercely protective and loving parents that I've come across. What we did here last year during one of our neurodiversity event was how having a child on the spectrum often leads to divorce, because it's just one additional challenge, if you like, challenge that married people have to kind of navigate through on how are we going to now support our child together. So this high rate of divorce, I mean, the statistics also show that there's high rate of divorce in families where the children are on the spectrum, which is quite sad because, it's genetic. It's coming from either you as mom or dad. So
Is it genetic?
Yes, it is, because if you actually think about it, back then in
let's see what
mom,
science say.
in
I
your
do know it's
mom
genetic.
and dad's. Okay, well, my opinion is back then during your mom or dad's era, neurodiversity wasn't a thing, right? If
What do you mean it wasn't a thing?
it wasn't a thing, it wasn't
I don't
known.
think that the term.
So the term
Okay.
wasn't known. As a parent, for example, if you struggle to concentrate in class or you struggle to read, you would go to the stupid class. They would classify you as stupid. And it's not as well known as what it is today. Neurodiversity is definitely, people are raising more awareness about it. And if you actually look at it, majority, okay, maybe not majority, we'll check the stats to confirm that, but some of the kids who are actually neurodiverse, it stems from genetics, it stems from parents. It's most likely that the mother or the father has autism or ADHD, but they never got the opportunity to be diagnosed back then. They
Yeah.
never got the chance to find out.
Yeah, and actually, we were trying to verify whether it's a scientific fact that is genetically adopted from the parents. And according to the World Health Organization, it says that neurodiversity has a strong genetic component, especially in conditions like autism, ADHD, dyslexia, and others. So this is definitely supported by science that it is largely and it has got a very strong genetic component. What were you thinking?
No, I just think when you say genetic, it's like passed down, like it's.
Yes.
I mean, yes, I understand passed down, but like, is that like the core of it? I mean, the research is saying 80 to 90% is genetics.
Mm.
But like, if I have autism,
Mhm.
is it 100% confirmed that my child will have autism? Is it solely based on genetics, or are there other factors?
There's definitely other factors, but as you said, you've just mentioned the stats. 80 to 90, you said 80 to 90% is genetically adopted, autism in particular. So yes, that 10% we can explore and understand where does that 10% come from. Is it environmental? Maybe if you say kids that grow where there's mines and there's always smoke and, you know, that, or in my time when you grew up, there were houses that had asbestos roof. So because of being exposed to asbestos, people had lung cancer or lung disease. So in that case, you know, you can't say it's genetic, it's environmental. So it would be worth doing research. Maybe that's something we can check next time about that 10%.
Yes, definitely. I do think it is something that we can do research on to clarify, to see, is it genetically inherited or is there something more to it? But just based on that, so if you had to think from a parent's perspective or as a coach or a teacher, how can you stop seeing a child through the lens of deficit?
I think it's mostly, like I said, it's very important to educate yourself. I think that's like one of the biggest ways you can make an impact and really start a change in society, making sure that more and more people are educated. And we know that at the root, it starts with like, what are we learning at school? Like, what, like, it's very important that we know history, for example. We know that World War II happened between these two dates, but it's also important that we know that, yes, neurodiversity exists, and that you might have ADHD, and there are um, these I don't want to use the word challenges associated with autism, but there are also these major strengths that need to be emphasized. And the more people focus on the positive, the more we can kind of stop seeing it as a negative connotation. We can stop seeing it as there's something wrong. It's more, okay, there's something that's very unique about you. Yes, we are all different, but this kind of makes you stand out as a person. And the more people educate themselves, the more, I feel like if it's just integrated in schools and kids, like if our kids of today start learning it, I feel like in 10 to 20 years from now, it won't even be seen as a negative thing. Like
Sure.
that's like, I feel like that could really change a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I mean, you know, a society that sees neurodiversity as a deficit, definitely it's robbing itself of a diverse source of innovation.
And sorry to interrupt. I also think that back then it just wasn't really, I just feel like parents out there, I feel like they were I don't know how to say this, but they were like more worried about like raising their kids and getting
And
their
food.
raising their kids, making sure there's a roof on their child's head. And I mean, you have to give the parents credit. They're working really hard to get their kids to become upstanding citizens that educating themselves about it wasn't really
A priority.
a priority. So I don't want to say that um like it was a bad thing that parents out there weren't educated in the past. I do think that like we have and we're in a time and we are privileged enough to still educate our kids today, especially in the world where technology is a big thing. There are so many tools out there where you can educate, and like there's no excuse right now to not educate yourself.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, even if there's, even as you say that, there are communities in which access to information is really difficult. I mean, I'm just thinking of people in the villages or people in the townships that don't have access to information. So they've got a pretty good excuse. If they're not learning this at the clinic or at the local hospital, they don't have access to the internet. There's really nobody to teach them, right? So I think as citizens, we can do quite a lot to help educate other people. But back to your question that you asked about how can people stop seeing or teachers stop seeing neurodivergent students from a lens of deficit. And I've already answered part of it, but I wanted to say from experience, imagine all these neurodivergent students that we have in our classes, especially during current STEM affairs. If we were looking at them like, oh no, that one has nothing important to say, or how can they know about space science or the stuff you cover, solar flares that happen, the collision of the galaxies, for example, that our neurodivergent students have a lot to say. If we looked at those students through a lens of deficit, our classes won't be so enriched. Our classes discussions are richer. Oh, you fixed it. Wow! Was it by accident? What? Was it by accident? No. Were you intentionally building it?
I was trying to fix it.
I was trying to fix it. I couldn't get it.
But she can't get it back. If she undo it and get it back.
Yes, you can't get it. As you have seen, this episode is captured in the comfort of our home. My colleagues have just run off to bed and in their pajamas. You might have seen them because it's time to sleep. It's in the evening, a few hours before midnight. So the couches are empty now. So if you would like to contribute to our out of the box series, give us a call, send us an email, drop us a WhatsApp. We would be more than happy to have you add your knowledge or your experience with our community. So my last words to you at home is start celebrating the difference at home. Through language, it could be through play or through conversation. Find a community. If you are raising a child on the spectrum, find a community, talk to other parents, reach out to a supportive school. There's quite a few of them. Yes, I know some of them are expensive because they're private school, but reach out to organizations like ours, Kids Innovate Africa, where we provide STEM education in a very inclusive way. So do not be an island. Reach out to your community. And also watch how your child lights up watch how your child lights up when they feel seen or they feel heard. It's such a powerful thing for any parent to observe in their child. So this is what I want you to ask your child tonight. What do you think your brain is great at? You might just discover their superpower. Good night.